Good evening, Praise Chapel Fresno, and all of those of you tuning in. We appreciate you tuning in no matter where you're tuning in at, or what you're tuning in on. We're just appreciative that you're here. Still going through our biblical BIOS. Just want to get a few things out real quick, as we still have our canned food drive or our non-perishable food drive that's been going on for our Feed the People. The can is in our foyer, so if you guys, if you're out, if you can just pick up a little extra, drop it in there. I've been doing that throughout the week, or my wife has been doing that throughout the week. We're just bringing whatever we have extra, we're dropping it off. And we have people from outside of our church that have been donating, and we're appreciative of that too. But just keeping that up to the forefront, because that is going to be coming up here pretty quickly. We're going to have to get it all kind of packaged together and get it out to wherever we're going to be putting it. So still got that going on, and still need people that are willing to serve inside of our Sunday school ministry, our kids' church. So again, I think we've been posting it all over social media. And I've had a few people kind of approach and ask some questions. We're just going to gather that up and get you directed to the right person. But again, just really need volunteers that are willing just to help out in these areas. If you say, well, Pastor, I really don't know how to teach kids, it's still okay. We have a program. We can teach you how to teach kids. Well, I don't know what to do. Don't worry. We can find a use for you. We just really have this growing need for individuals that are willing to work inside of our children's ministry so we can get these things up and rolling. We're doing a program that I don't see most churches even doing or even focusing on. We have that running, and we're trying to get everything up and running so that we can get our kids to a point where not only can the kids receive something from God, from our instructors in a manner that is consistent with how they can be taught, but also so our parents can receive the word and not have to worry about, is my kid causing a disturbance? Is this happening? Is that happening? Like not having to worry about our kids at all. So please, just anyone that is willing to, come approach me, come to me. We're going to gather you guys up, and we're going to get you directed to the right person. So just let me know. We'll see you guys on Sunday. But still going through our biblical BIOS. We're at Jacob and Esau now. I'm not like choosing to do them in order, but it just seemed appropriate that after Abraham came Isaac, and after Isaac came Jacob. But what's interesting is you can't really do Isaac without Esau. Or I'm sorry, you can't do Jacob without Esau. I tried that. I tried kind of like separating them, but you never hear of Esau outside of Jacob after they kind of separate. And I was like, it just didn't feel right just to do it on his own. And also still found some things that kind of came through that just, were kind of shocking to me again. And I think the more that I unwrap these, the more that I'm jumping even deeper into those Sunday school lessons that we were taught throughout the years. We always talk about specific people, Jacob wrestling with God and all this. And I kind of jumped into that a little bit. So my biblical reference for tonight, I'm going through Genesis chapter 25, verse 21 through Genesis chapter 49, verse 33. That's the mention of Israel's death. So Jacob becomes Israel. Now, I kind of stopped after Jacob gets his name changed, only because there is something different about Jacob being Jacob, and then when Jacob becomes Israel, and then we start getting involved with the tribes and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to go through till it was just Jacob. So who are they? They were the twin set of brothers that were born to Rebekah and Isaac. Jacob would grow up to be renamed Israel after he wrestles and would father 12 sons who become the 12 tribes, but they don't all come from his two wives. Esau would be described as red and hairy when he comes out, and most people will put that as not so much that he had red hair, but they're like typically it'd be more apt to describe him as angry. I read that and I was like, okay, because I'm like, a red baby. Well, yeah, some babies will come out and they'll be red. Some come out, different colors. But just at this point, I thought it was funny that they called him that. And it's commonly thought that Esau's descendants would end up eventually becoming the Roman Empire. So we can trace that back there, and there's a few things that I was looking through in Hebrew teaching and all that, because that's who really kind of pulls it apart for Esau. Rebekah is pregnant with twins, but the two boys, they're already fighting viciously in the womb, and she went to God and she's asking God basically what's going on. Now you can imagine those mothers that you've said I can feel, they're kicking, they're this. My wife would constantly complain about my daughter kicking her at night. And I'm sure you ladies have gone through that same thing if you've been through motherhood. But here, this mom is like, these two are constantly fighting. They're constantly moving around. There's some ridiculous thought out there that says every time she would get next to a pagan idol, that Esau would flip around in her room, and every time she'd get next to like a Christian icon or an icon representing her faith of the Jewish nation, that Jacob would move around. But that's not even mentioned in the Bible. That's just something that I thought was pretty funny. But here's what God says to her. And this is the promise that God gives to Rebekah that she holds to later on in Isaac and Jacob's story. So this is what he said. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. So this is the promise he gives before the boys are even born. And what's interesting is he doesn't say the stronger will be first and that one will be. He just says one is going to be stronger than the other, and then the younger one is going to rule over the older one. So he doesn't mention who's going to be stronger or who's going to rule. He just gives basic, like, this is what's going to happen. So when Rebekah is protecting Jacob in certain things that happen through his story, she's doing it because of the promise that God gave to her. So he reveals 2 sons, 2 nations, but they're always going to be divided, and that one has chosen God to lead after Isaac. God didn't play favorites. He didn't give him names, nor does he even address his reasoning, because he says this before the boys are even born. Now, she gets kind of like, her gender reveal happens with God. He's like, you're going to have 2 sons, they're going to father 2 nations, and they're going to be at odds, but one's going to serve the other. Though Esau's character was not on the basis of God's choosing, because we know Esau basically becomes a wicked dude. He marries women he shouldn't have married. He goes into Canaan and he takes wives from there, which God specifically told the Jewish nation not to do. So he goes against them, but God didn't choose him based off of that quality. He just says, like, this is what's going to happen because he would know how Esau would turn out. So there's all this kind of like debate, like, because later on in the Bible, it will say, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. But it's the terms that God uses in those that it doesn't mean emotionally. It's saying Jacob I chose and Esau I rejected. So it comes down to those portions. But they're born and Esau comes out red and hairy. But Jacob comes out holding on to Esau's heel, and that's going to be kind of like Esau's game, or Jacob's game throughout his entire life with his brother. Like, he's always going to be the one that's going to be behind the scenes, but he's always going to be holding on to his brother, trying to take something from him. That's Jacob's story in a nutshell. Esau basically becomes a skilled hunter. He works the fields. He's strong. Jacob's a bit more indoorsy. So you can see why, like, Isaac would prefer Esau over Jacob, only because he ate Esau's cooking and Esau provided for the family. While you kind of see Jacob, he's kind of portrayed as a mama's boy at this point. Just because of the fact he talks about he's weak. He just kind of is around the tent. He's not really doing much of anything. And then we're going to jump to Genesis 25, 29 through 33. This is where we start to see the shift of the story, where Esau becomes kind of more angry at his little brother. And it says, once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew, for I'm exhausted. Jacob said, sell me your birthright. Esau said, I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Later on, it's going to say he despised his birthright. And when we talk about birthright, we talk about the one who would be chosen within the family to continue his father's work. So when we look at God's promise to Abraham, to Isaac, technically speaking, because Esau was born first, that birthright, that blessing, belongs to Esau. So it should have been Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. But here Jacob says, sell it to me. They're born a minute apart, but yet even still, Esau was the oldest. And he says, sell it to me. And he says, well, what good is it going to be that I'm going to die? And all this is kind of pulled apart. When it talks about dying and he's saying, well, I'm about to die, so what use is it to me? It's basically just a sense that Esau is so exhausted and tired and just hungry. Like, I know people use this all the time, like, if I don't eat right now, I'm going to die, and they haven't eaten in 4 hours. Like, there are people that have literally gone 3-4 days without eating anything, and yeah, at one point you feel like you're going to die, but you're going to make it. But the son of the birthright would be the firstborn, who would receive a double portion of his inheritance, would become the household leader as well as the spiritual leader for the family. In this family's case, birthright would determine who was going to inherit the covenant God made with Abraham. Jacob takes advantage of the situation by scheming the flesh to gain something God had already promised to him. And I'm sure Rebekah, through her time, has been letting Jacob know what God has promised him. I know she's doing it. Like, if he's that big of a mama's boy, mama's boys are always going to be, they're going to have these huge egos because their moms just can tell them they're the most wonderful thing that has ever been birthed. So, of course, she's probably like, and don't you worry because God has promised this to you. But yet, he still wants to make this like, okay, it needs to be like in writing. It needs to be an agreement between us because technically it still should go to him. And then we're looking at Genesis 26, 34 through 35. And it says this, when Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Berai, the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. I think that's totally hilarious that, I understand he went and he did something he shouldn't have by going against God's word and marrying from the land of Canaan. But the fact that it's like, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah, like parents, you got to watch who your kids are going out with and who they're dealing with because it's going to affect your life just as much as it's going to affect theirs. Esau has done something he's never supposed to do. He went against the pattern that was established by Abraham. Never to marry a woman from Canaan, which speaks to previous verses when he would say, I despise my birthright. And it's likely because Esau might feel like he's missing out on something. Well, why can't I go to these women? Why can't I have them? Why is it that we can't do it? Like, I'm imagining he's just asking all these questions, and it's likely because Isaac has been preparing Esau to take his birthright, which would be, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And I mean, Esau's just being a big baby, and he's like, well, I want what I want, and I don't want you to tell me what I can't have. As Isaac ages, though, he wants to pass on his blessing. He knows his time is drawing near. And this is, of course, when Rebekah and Jacob come up with a scheme to steal the blessing from Esau we went over last week. But what ends up happening is, at one point, Esau says, like, he's so mad that he's plotting to kill his brother. So his mom comes to him, and Mama Becca, she goes, look, baby, you got to get out of here. I want you to go to your uncle's house. And go here and tell him your family, and he's going to take you in. But, like, you don't come back until I send for you. That's how mad Esau was and how determined he was to kill Jacob. So Jacob finds his uncle Laban. He finds his uncle Laban's house, and he falls in love with the youngest daughter. And so he goes up to Laban, and he says, I want to marry, and her name is Rachel. So he goes to his uncle, and he says, I want to marry Rachel. And the dad goes, well, what are you going to give me? And he says, well, I'll serve you for 7 years if you let me marry your youngest daughter. So they basically agree to it. And Laban says, okay, serve with me for 7 years and you can marry Rachel. So after those 7 years, he doesn't get Rachel. He gets the older sister, Leah. And Leah, she didn't come out quite right, and Jacob wasn't really attracted to her. So he gets upset with Laban and says, what'd you do? And he goes, okay, well, do another 7 years, and then I'll give you Rachel, because we typically don't like to marry off the younger when the older is available. Like, it would go from oldest to youngest. But serve another 7 years, and I'll give it to you. So he serves another 7 years, and he gets Rachel. However, Rachel is barren. What is with all these Hebrew women where it mentions how beautiful they are actually barren? Like, it happened with Abraham, it happened with Isaac, and now it's happening with Jacob, to where the ones that they want, the ones that they see as beautiful are barren. And so what ends up happening is Leah, though, she's not barren at all, very fertile. She gives him 6 sons. She gives him Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. So those are 6 sons that she gives him. But then Rachel, she gets upset. She's getting a little jelly because there's so many boys on that end. So she tells Jacob to take her servant Belial as kind of a surrogate, who gives Jacob 2 sons. That's Dan and Naphtali. And then Leah gets jealous, so she gives Jacob her servant Zilpah, and she tells him to use Zilpah as an alternate. And she gives Jacob 2 more sons, Gad and Asher. And then it says, then God remembers Rachel, and he gives her Joseph. So what we'll see here is, yes, they will all kind of like play that part in the 12 tribes, but Joseph's going to play a very dominant role here pretty soon. That's who Jacob was originally attracted. That's who Jacob originally wanted, was that woman. And I'm sure, he was a man of his faith, and I'm sure he took it to God first. And he got cheated by his uncle, thanks, Unc. And then he gets, then eventually he ends up getting the one he wants, and she ends up giving him Joseph, who becomes very prominent here. And then we're going to look at chapter 30, verse 27 and 28. So Jacob is ready to go. He's got all these kids, all these wives, everything's going on. He says, I need to leave here. So he goes to his uncle, who's now his father-in-law, and it says this, but Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages and I will give it. So he's saying, whatever you want, tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. Laban knows that all he's been blessed with was only because Jacob was there. He knew he was an invaluable worker. He really didn't want to lose it, but he knew if I try to step in the way of this, that I'm going to possibly lose out on some things that I've been blessed with. He doesn't do it in a good way, though. Laban does it very sneakily, because what happens is Jacob tells him exactly what his wages will be. He says, I'm going to go amongst the sheep, the goats, and I'm going to pick these specific ones. So Laban takes all those ones that Jacob would do, and he sends them to one of his son's farm. So when Jacob goes out there, he basically can't take anything. They find a way around it, though. But Uncle Laban doesn't hold to his word. He tries to deceive Jacob. There's a whole mess of family drama that happens, and that leads Jacob having to travel towards the land of his brother Esau, and that terrifies him. So what he does is he sends a messenger out on his behalf. We've all done this at some point or time. As kids, mom and dad are mad at us, so we send one of our brothers or our sisters out, and we're like, hey, go see how mad they are. Like, I just want to know. So Jacob has one of his messengers, like, I want you to go to him, and this is what happens when the messenger comes back. This is in 32, 6, and 8. It says, and the messenger returned to Jacob saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he's coming to meet you. Like, his stomach probably dropped at this point, right? Like, oh my God, I stole everything from him, and he's coming to meet me. And with 400 men with him. Like, that's way worse. That's like way worse than hearing your mom saying, wait till your dad gets home and I'm gonna tell you. Like, this is like mom is coming after you with dad, with your uncles, and with your brothers and sisters. Verse 7, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, obviously. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, then the other camp is left to escape. Now, that's not very smart thinking, but I get what he's doing. He's like, hey, I'm going to separate everything 50-50. So if I lose stuff, I'm only going to lose half of what I've been blessed with. When Jacob was confronted by Laban, he's like bold, right? He comes at him when he gets cheated out of Rachel. He comes at him very bold when he gets cheated out of the livestock. He comes at Laban like very bold. But right now he fears Esau. It's because he knew that with Laban he was right. He was always in the right, but he knows he stole from Esau. So he is terrified. Jacob's guilt robbed him of his strength, and Esau had sworn to kill him. Not only that, Esau still hasn't heard back from Rebekah. She hasn't told him to come home. And she said, don't come back until I send for you, because she knows Esau. Now, then this is what Jacob does. This is in chapter 32, verses 11 and 12. He prays this, please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, that he may come and attack me. The mothers with the children, but you said, I will surely do you good and make you offering as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for the multitude. So right now Jacob is terrified because everything that he's done has come out of deception of Isaac, stealing the birthright from Esau. But he still puts his dependence on God and his ability to fulfill the promise that he gives him. Jacob knows he's done things in his life. I mean, it says all have sinned and fall short of the glory, but Jacob probably knows, like, I've done some pretty bad things in my life, and God, I hope you've forgiven me for them, that I hope you accepted the sacrifices, like, this is going wrong, and I'm just hoping I'm not out of your favor. But he begins to remind God of, like, what he promised. He's reminding God, like, hey, you told me you would only do good. You told me that you would make me a father of many nations. You told me my offspring would be like the multitudes of the sands of the sea that can't be counted. You remember that, right? Like, he's just trying to remind God because he's so terrified. So Jacob knows he's done things in his life, but what he does is he tells his family, I want you to take all my possessions. I want you to go across the river. Like he wants them to go. So he ends up alone. And then chapter 32, verses 24 and 25 say this. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. So this man would be the incarnation of God. So this is Jesus. It's interesting to see though. There is no inciting incident. Like nothing happens where it doesn't say a man came upon him and they argued and they fought. It just says he's alone and then all of a sudden he's wrestling with this man. There's no context to what happened before this. He just starts wrestling. It doesn't say that man or Jesus approached Jacob. It just says, bam, they're wrestling. They wrestle all night, and somehow Jacob, he's kind of an even match for this. So in this brawl to a point that Jesus himself has to touch his hip. Now, it doesn't say he was winning. It's just saying he's an even match for what was going on. Now, Jacob's probably a big dude. I mean, he was at home a lot. He's with mama a lot in the tent. I don't think he was out there putting in as much work as Esau was. But at this point, I mean, if he's able to wrestle some guy and be even with him all night, like I wrestled with my brother once when I came back from the military. He challenged me on something, and I wrestled with him, and it took about 5 seconds to get him on the ground. But like I was still worn out. He was still worn out. I'm like wrestling all night and to the break of day. That's got to be exhausting, and somehow he's able to put up with it. Then he pops his hip out of place. So much so, he's so even that Jesus has to change the nature of the fight. Like, Jesus has to change how things happen because he's like, look, I ain't going down, you ain't going down, but you got to learn today. And then Genesis 32, 26 through 28 says, Then he said, Let me go, for the day has broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, What is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. So he didn't win. He didn't overcome. He just was able to last. The name change out of right means it means struggle in God. But oftentimes Hebrew names are not used as the object of the verb, but the subject. So his name would more likely be apt to God rules. And of course, like, that is his blessing. God is ruling over this. And there's a lot more that God has already promised, but he's like, I won't go until you bless me. What's interesting is that through the rest of these chapters, though, he's called Jacob more than he's called Israel. Now, this is a turning point for Jacob as he's renamed Israel by God. But in the Bible, he's still called Jacob a lot more than he's called Israel. He and Esau, they basically reunite, they reconcile, and Jacob lives in a city close to his brother, and we begin to see the nation of Israel grow. So as he's coming to this place where he has to meet his brother and these 400 men, he comes up and he sends all these gifts up front in front of him, and he says, because if he sees these gifts, he'll be happy, and then when he sees me, he'll be even happier, or he'll be happy with me and at least not kill me, maybe yell at me, maybe scold me, maybe he'll punch me, I don't know, but at least I won't die. But when these gifts, when they all approach Esau basically tells them, keep everything that's yours. Like, I'm good, you're good. And, there's some love that's kind of shown between them, but it's not really for them to cohabitate together. So, yes, he's living around where Esau would be, but they're not, like, close enough to where it's like, hey, come over for dinner next week. There's still a distance between them. And it's mainly, I'm sure that there's still some animosity there because of what, Esau would see Jacob was blessed with, but also, the fact that he's held this resentment basically since the day he ate Jacob's stew. So what can we learn from Jacob and Esau? Number one is don't give up on God for satisfaction. Esau was due his birthright. Esau gave up everything just to fill his stomach. Sometimes what we do is we devalue what God has blessed us with because we're not satisfied with what we have. Or is it that we've seen something better and now we devalue what God has already given us? Number two, fear is not a sin. Don't let your fear lead you away from God. It led Jacob to prayer. It led Jacob to review his life. It led Jacob to remind God of the promise that he's made him. If Jacob had made a different decision when in fear, out of remembrance of his past sins, it would have led him away from deliverance, and he would have missed a divine visitation with Jesus Christ. Don't let your fears or what you fear to happen lead you away from what God is about to do. Because here we see that it was Jacob's fear that he took to God that led him directly to a place where he would encounter God, into a place where he's alone, where he's having to face his angry brother and 400 men, and the assumption that they're coming there to kill him, and yet he still is willing to follow God. He's still willing to be alone, and he's still willing to listen to what God has to do, and then gets put into a confrontation, and he basically stands toe-to-toe with this guy, knowing my brother's on the way, and I think he's going to kill me. Don't give up because of what you fear to happen. Because oftentimes those are the places where God meets with us. Those are the places where God visits us. Those are the places where God changes what we are, when we let our fear lead us closer to God. Number 3, sometimes God needs you alone. God had to get Jacob alone before he could deal with him. While all the activity, this huge entourage, all this fear that's happening, that's probably causing Jacob a lot of management that he's having to complete, telling people what to do at this point, that God has to isolate him just so he can say, like, we need to talk about some things. Once he was alone, it was God who commanded his attention. Had to wrestle it, but God commanded his attention. And number 4, hold on until you're blessed. There's some people I know that have been telling me of what they're going through. But Jacob was reduced to a place where all he could do was hold on to the Lord. That's all he could do. Jacob couldn't fight anymore. He couldn't hold on. But that's not a bad place to be. There's so many people that are saying, like, I just feel like I'm getting beat. I feel like I'm getting pulled these different ways. And I feel like all I'm holding on to is my faith. Yes, hold on to it. Because God says that's where your blessing comes in. That yes, you're going to have to fight through it. Yes, you're going to have to sometimes bear being alone, but that's where God can meet us, bless us, and change who we are simply because we say we're not going to allow our fear to pull us away from God. We're going to use it to pull us closer to God. We're not going to make decisions out of our fear because it's going to lead us likely away from a place that God brought us, or that God's trying to bring us to. And it's okay to be alone sometimes. It's okay to be alone. Because that's where God exactly had to take Jacob to get him in line and get him to focus on what his true calling was. And he didn't let go until God changed everything about him. Because notice, he says, I won't let go until you bless me. And all God does is change his name. But God returns to him and then speaks more blessing over his life when he calls him Israel. So that's Jacob and Esau. Going to continue to go through these just until I feel God tell us that we need to go into a different direction. I love the questions that are coming forward. Like, yeah, keep bringing them up. Some people are like, wow, like I didn't even think about that. I went back and reread, and people are like, it's not like it shook my faith, but it definitely took me in a different direction here, and I love it, and I think that's great. Keep asking your questions. Keep asking for clarification. If you don't understand these things, direct message us, put a comment on the video, anything like that, and we'll answer it as best we can. But other than that, don't forget, we have our Sunday morning service, 10 a.m. Make sure you're texting people right after this. Tell them to come to church. I know you're like, Pastor, I do it every time. Keep doing it. It's each seed you're planting is growing. Each seed you're planting is watering. And if you haven't seen someone in church, reach out to them. Say, hey, I haven't seen you. I hope you're doing okay. Is there anything I can do for you? I'm just praying for you. I love you, and I hope to see you this Sunday. But don't stop reaching out just because you say, well, I just don't feel like it's worth it. You know, there are hundreds of people that I've probably made contact with, and I've only seen 2 of them come through these doors. But I text everybody I know, and I say, look, either watch us online, check out our YouTube, check out our Instagram, check out our website, or get into my church because God is doing something. I may have only seen 2 of them, and I've invited hundreds, and I continue to do that to this day. So just keep reaching out. God is still moving through lives, the things I'm hearing, and one day I hope those people can get up in front of here and tell this church what God has done through their lives and the amazing things that have been happening in their lives because of their faith in holding into what God is doing and just drawing closer and closer to the fire that God is unleashing within this church. But we love you guys. We'll see you Sunday, 10 a.m., either in person or live casted. We'll see you then.